Never took any real computer science classes in college or anything. Hackathons are another thing to check out. A lot of times hackathons are sponsored by tech companies. I actually did one for Mercedes Benz a number of years ago. Grand prize was a CLA. I think the CLA had just come out. Yeah, so I was on a team with 3 other people. We won the grand prize.
Y'all won it?
We won it. And they were like, hey, we have this car. What do you want us to do with this? And we're like, I don't know these people. Like, we all met at the hackathon, right? We're not going to split one car amongst 4 strangers. So could we just get the cash? And yeah, we got about, it came out to about $7,000 after taxes.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Custom Journeys podcast. My name is Andrew Baines. I'm your host, and today I'm very excited to be joined by Justin Lucas. He's an engineering manager for Major League Baseball, and he's going to talk to us about a little bit what he does on his current day job, how he got into tech, and also what he looks for in candidates when he's interviewing folks and trying to decide if they're going to be somebody that's going to join their team or not. So very excited to learn about how Major League Baseball is using technology, what he does as a software engineer. So we'll go ahead and jump into it. Justin, thanks for joining. I know the World Series just ended, and you've probably been busy this year, but I appreciate you joining today. How are you doing today, man?
Not bad. Glad to be here. Listen to a number of episodes of your podcast, and it sounds awesome. I learned a lot about other people doing similar roles for other companies, so excited to be here.
Cool. Well, yeah, I appreciate you joining. I think you may be – we had another episode with somebody from an NBA. They were a product manager from the NBA, but you're definitely the first guest from Major League Baseball. I'm going to see if I can get all the Major League sports. I think the dream for me would be to get a Dallas Cowboys engineer on here or somebody from IT just because that's my team. We got some haters out there, but, that's the best team out there, so I definitely got to, support whenever I can. But definitely excited to have you on and kind of talk about what you do. So engineering manager, Major League Baseball. What do you kind of do for Major League Baseball right now?
So I work on what's called the baseball data team, and I'm a tech lead for a subdivision of that called the core data team. So basically what my team does is we take care of data like schedules, rosters, statistics. We have an API that we basically use to send all that data out to all the other people within baseball who use it. So broadcasters, the teams themselves for analytical purposes, other teams within MLB, such as the ones who build the MLB mobile apps and stuff like that.
Okay, neat. What kind of data are we talking? Like, because I know I've seen like data really be integrated into the NFL, for example, where like it may be a pass and like after the play is done, they'll be like, hey, this pass had a 20% probability of being completed, or it may be like, hey, this football player ran 23.5 miles per hour on this particular play. So are you guys doing like player analytics to that detail, or what are some of like the specifics on the data side that you capture?
Yeah, so if you've heard of StatCast, that's kind of what that is. And so every play at all the ballparks, there's a camera system that basically captures everything that goes on the field, right? So it captures all the players, it captures the ball, it actually captures the players at what's called a skeletal level, so we can see where their legs are separate from their arms to the rest of their body. And then from that, we can calculate all these kinds of metrics. So we can calculate their sprint speed. We can calculate the speed of the ball off the bat. Starting just last year, we started calculating the actual bat speed. And so we can see how fast the bat was going when the ball hit off the bat, where on the bat the ball made contact, and all kinds of cool stuff like that.
Okay, exciting, good stuff. Yeah, in one of my previous roles, I did like biomechanics research. So I got kind of familiar with some of the data you're talking, like joint mechanics, joint angles, joint velocities, joint accelerations, that kind of stuff. So it sounds like it's not too different or too distant from that. And then you said you make APIs for different people like broadcasters, and I'm assuming you may have like some fantasy owners and like sports bettors and stuff like that are kind of like trying to use this data as well. Is it open and available to like any and everybody, like open source or what?
Not really. So it's mostly just for people who have a use for it within the baseball community. The API is technically open, but we don't provide support or anything for the public to use it.
Okay, gotcha. Cool. And then how long you been doing this for?
I've been doing this I think I joined MLB about 9 years ago now. When I first joined, we were actually doing live video streaming. So I was on that team. MLB started more than 10 years ago now. Basically started with MLB.tv. If you ever used that, basically just a way to stream live games. And they got really good at that and started offering that same technology to outside partners. So we started doing the live video streaming for PGA and MLS and ESPN, Fox Sports. They built up a whole department around that. At some point, that department got sold to Disney as part of Disney streaming services and Disney Plus. Then I came back to MLB and started working on the baseball data team and started working on actual statistics and other data stuff.
Okay. Exciting. You gave me a sneak peek when we talked previously before actually recording. But I don't think that's something that a lot of people know about. I had heard about it actually in like My First Million podcast episode where somebody said, okay, hey, like the MLB was actually the one kind of leading the efforts on the streaming side. And then the rest of the story kind of played out like you said. So I think that's a little fun fact that not a lot of people know about. Since you mentioned like that's kind of how you came into MLB, I'm kind of curious, even before that, how'd you even get into tech?
So actually, I would probably thank my dad for that. My dad was very tech savvy.
Yeah.
And it might seem weird today, but back in the 90s when I was growing up, not everyone had a personal computer. I think I was the only one of my friends who had a computer at home until like high school. And so I just always had technology around me to play with and whatnot. And it was kind of a little hobby of mine in middle school and high school to build websites. And at some point when I was about halfway through with college, I ended up taking on a job with a company called Blaze, a little small like startup company in LA. And they basically paid me to learn. I didn't have a computer science degree, so I was kind of starting from scratch. But, I would take on a project and spend half the time learning how to do it, and then the other half of the time, actually implementing whatever it was. And then went from there. After a few years, I finally built up enough skills to, be able to call myself an actual software engineer, be able to real interviews.
I'm in the same boat as you, man. The 90s babies, man, the real 90s babies, like we didn't really grow up with laptops and stuff like that. Or if we did, it was like dial up at home, dial up internet, and it wasn't really working that much. But I don't think I actually got my first laptop until like college. So can definitely relate to you there. But going back to that first role, how'd you even convince this startup to like, number one, hire you, given that you didn't have a software engineering background, but even to pay you? Because I know a lot of times startups can sometimes be like, hey, we'll give you a piece of equity if you wanted to come join the startup. But like you coming to the plate with no experience, how do you kind of get them to, give you a job, but then also pay you and understand that like, hey, you're learning and they're willing to invest in you along the way?
Yeah, so my main interview was someone who was non-technical, and I knew just enough to kind of BS my way through that interview. Right? And then in terms of pay, honestly, they didn't pay me very much. They would not have been able to hire someone who really knew what they were doing at that pay. I think I was making maybe $25,000 a year at that time. So pay wasn't a lot. It was commensurate with my lack of experience.
Okay, gotcha. Well, cool. Well, I'm imagining that you learned a lot on the job. How long was that gap between that first job and then landing the job at the MLB or at MLB?
Good question. So I landed that job. I was about 21. Started working for MLB probably about 6 years later. And there was a number of other jobs in between where, I learned a ton.
So you land that first role. They're like, yo, Justin, we like you. Maybe they realize, okay, hey, he's kind of, faking it until he makes it, but he lands this first role. What was kind of that next role, or kind of walk me through that process after that? Like, what was the next step in your career journey after that?
So I was with that company about a year and a half, and yeah, I learned a ton. They had senior engineers there who I could go and ask questions to all day, which was awesome. And that was definitely instrumental in being able to level up my technical skills. The next company I worked for was a video startup where I basically knew enough to take on my own projects and start my own, basically work a lot more independently. But at the same time, it's software, so like even if you're working independently, you're still learning a lot as you go.
Gotcha. So MLB, they're the biggest company you've ever worked for. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. What would you say are like some of the pros and cons of like working for a big company compared to like the startups? Because it seems like you have a lot of startup experience before coming to MLB.
Yeah, so I would say one of the pros of working at a startup is you're going to have a lot more on your plate, and it's going to cover more of what that company does, right? So at MLB, or at any large company, really, not just MLB, you're probably going to start off with a pretty small role, and you'll be in charge of a smaller section of the company or a smaller part of your department or whatever. Whereas a startup, you're going to be asked to do more things. You'll probably be asked to take on more greenfield projects earlier, just because there aren't as many people, they're able to take that stuff on.
And then I know you said, I think at one point where we were talking off camera, I think you said, or you even said it earlier just now, you said, hey, you didn't have a background in CS. What did you actually go to college for?
I was studying economics in college.
Okay, gotcha. And did you graduate with that degree in economics, or did you?
No, so I started working. Basically, I had my son at 21, and so at that point, I was like, all right, I got to make some money, and that's when I first took on that first software job.
Yeah, no, the life responsibilities can do that. As somebody with two kids, it's like I got two kids myself, and so I'm like I'm understanding. You know, there's what you want to do, and there's like what you have to do. So you ended up dropping out of college, landing that first job. Man, that's pretty impressive. Where'd you go to college at? Also,
USC.
gotcha. So what? I don't. You can tell me if I press too far, if I ask questions that you don't want to talk about. But what was that kind of like that mindset like back then? I'd imagine like that's very stressful. You're a 21-year-old with a baby on the way, and you're like, okay, I got to make money now. I got to drop out of college. I'm sure like parents and outside noise are all saying, hey, what are you doing? You're gonna ruin your life if you drop out. You have a baby on the way. So like, how did you kind of? What was your mindset at that point, and how did you kind of like work through that?
Pretty much that. I mean, when you have a baby on the way, there's a lot to pay for. There's a lot of costs that come along with that, diapers and everything else. And so, my main thing was, hey, I got to have some sort of career, some way, some financial plan. And so, and my main skill at the time was technology. Like I said, I'd sort of done it as a hobby. I knew I could land some type of job and build that into, an actual career. So that was the plan. And the plan was always to go back. And I went back for a few classes afterwards. But
Okay.
yeah, seemed to work out.
What language did you know? Like, what language were you primarily the best at that point?
Back then, it was PHP. PHP was kind of what everyone did back then. That's what all websites were built in. So yeah, I kind of at some point became an expert in PHP, and that's what I did every day.
Okay. And you just learned it from like doing personal hobbies and projects just on your own, or like, did you even take like any classes, even though you were majoring in economics, or what?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, never took any real computer science classes in college or anything. But I mean, the nice part about software is all that information is all online. You can take courses on YouTube or elsewhere. All the documentation is right there to look up. I don't think you really need much to, get started on that kind of stuff.
Okay, cool. So, 21, baby on the way, drop out of college, land a job at the startup. You stay there for a little while, and then you kind of progress to other startups and gain more experience. At what point did you land that first job at MLB?
So at the time, I was actually freelancing. I was taking on different clients and working on small to medium sized projects for them. And I was doing that for about a year. And someone from MLB sent me an email, probably through LinkedIn. It was basically asking if I wanted to apply. And they were starting up a new office in San Francisco. And I'm a huge baseball fan, so of course I said yes, absolutely, and went on the interview, and that was it.
Okay, cool. Who are you? Who's your favorite team, by the way? I didn't even ask you that.
I'm a Dodgers fan.
Okay, that makes sense. You're in LA. Okay, so you're freelancing. You were doing that full time at that moment?
Yep, I've
Okay.
been doing that for about a year.
Okay, so what made the LinkedIn recruiter reach out to you then? Like, if you weren't employed, like, how did they even know that you had the skill set that they may be interested in? Was it like a portfolio online, or what was it?
Yeah, I'm sure my LinkedIn had all my information. As a freelancer, I was always looking for new clients, and so I made sure all my stuff was out there, my portfolio and resume and everything. So I'm assuming that's how they found me was through LinkedIn.
Okay. Any advice or any tips for people that maybe they're in that position where they're freelancing, primarily looking for clients, but they may be potentially open for work? Like, any advice for how to land more clients, or how to potentially get recruiters to be excited about them as a potential candidate?
Yeah, so for freelancing in particular, network, network, network. I'm pretty sure I got all of my clients, at least 90% of them, through my network, through people I had worked with before. And I was working a job where I was essentially just bored, right? I wasn't learning as much as I wanted to, wasn't really progressing. And so I essentially was just like, all right, I'm just going to go freelance, and I want to work on something new.
Yeah.
And so I hit up everybody who I had worked with in the past and said, hey, I'm freelancing now. If you guys got projects, let me know. And thankfully, about two or three people hit me up and said, hey, my company's doing this, or I'm freelancing also if you're interested in working with me. And it sort of went from there. Obviously, not everybody, if you're first starting out, you're not going to have that kind of network. So it is, I think, important to basically just put yourself out there. Either make sure all your information is on LinkedIn. As a software engineer, GitHub is used so people could actually just go in and look at your exact work and see how good you are. And there's things like meetups where you can go and just meet people in the tech community. I'm pretty sure every large city has, tech meetups where you can go and network, meet people, tell them what you're doing, tell them what you're looking to do. And I'm sure plenty of people land freelance clients or jobs, do stuff like that.
Yeah, I think Meetup, especially meetup.com, is a big one that people overlook. I think at one point I was looking to transition from mechanical engineering into software engineering and just wanted to learn more about like JavaScript, React, and then even learned about some things on the back end. And I had found like a meetup here in Houston for free code camp. And that was kind of what I did for like a year or two, just to kind of like get more knowledgeable and learn new skills. So I think that's one that a lot of people kind of sleep on. Is there anyone like on a national level or even one locally in like the Bay Area or in LA that people maybe want to check out that you recommend?
Well, I mean, when I was in the Bay Area doing this, there was a meetup for pretty much every single programming language. And so, like I said, I was doing PHP, so I went to the PHP one. I'd also got into doing, there was a, what's it called, technology called Angular that was popular at the time. And so I went on to all the Angular ones. So I would say whichever subset of technology that you're interested in, find that meetup, and you'll find, you'll find people who are hiring, people who are working in that field. You'll learn something new. So can't go wrong with those.
Gotcha. And then on the client or the business development side for freelancing, were most of the people that you were reaching out to, were they people at startups or were they at more like established companies? And do you feel like there may be a difference in terms of like reaching out to those different types of companies?
That's a good question. I think I was open to both, but I ended up working more with much smaller companies or individuals who were just trying to get their own thing off the ground and needed help on the tech side. I think it was just because that was easier for me. For a larger company, you kind of have to have an in. Usually have to know someone there or know how to, know that they're looking for someone with those skills in the first place. So yeah, most of my experience was with much smaller companies, either startups or individuals.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I assumed. It's like with those bigger companies, there's a lot of red tape. You got to go be like a certain vendor or supplier. You got to get into their system. You got to do all these different steps. Whereas I feel like with small, medium-sized businesses, it's like you can more easily directly connect with the person who's the key decision maker. And you just need somebody with a P card, really. Like if they got a purchase, if they got a credit card and they got authorization to pay you, then I think that's kind of like a lot lower barrier to entry than going through all the red tape on like the big Fortune 500 companies.
Back to your previous question, I almost forgot about this. Hackathons are another thing to check out. A lot of times, hackathons are sponsored by tech companies or companies who are looking for people to work in their tech department. And I've definitely been to some where you're there hacking and obviously showing off your skills, and they're looking to hire people who came and participated. So definitely check out hackathons if you're looking either for freelance gigs or for
Gotcha.
something.
And some of those have like cash prizes too, right?
Yep. I actually did one for Mercedes Benz a number of years ago,
What?
and they were the grand prize was a CLA. I think the CLA had just come out.
Oh, you talking about
And
25 grand at least, like, or
yep,
25 to 30 grand.
yeah. So I was on a team with three other people. We won the grand prize.
Y'all want it?
We won it, and they were like, "Hey, we have this car. What do you want us to do with this?" And we're like, I don't know these people. Like, we all met at the hackathon, right? We're not going to split one car amongst four strangers. So could we just get the cash? And yeah, we got about, it came out to about 7 grand after taxes.
7 grand each after taxes?
Yeah.
Okay. Man. All right, I'll take it. Man, I feel like, was that an episode on Martin where like somebody won a car and they tried to split it up between all the friends? Like somebody had it like on a Monday, somebody else had it like on a Tuesday. I think that was an episode of Martin. So it's a good thing that y'all didn't go with the car because I don't know how that would have worked.
It's a
But
nice car, though.
yeah, no. I remember that because I was working at General Motors when that car came out, and it was like that's their entry level Benz, but it was
Yep.
still like 25 to 30 grand. But it was a nice car. So man, that's awesome. What did y'all have to make for the hackathon actually, or what did y'all make to win the hackathon?
Yeah. So we actually made this product that would run on the entertainment system. I don't know what they actually call it. And basically, it would allow you to drive around, find things you might want to pay for, or use maps in the way you would normally use maps now, and then pay for it with Bitcoin. And so we set up the system that actually worked. So they gave us these, the entertainment system, or like a cutout of the entertainment system with the screen and the touch panel. And basically, we were able to hack it onto a mapping system, and then on the server, be able to run a service that essentially allows you to pay for things with Bitcoin.
What?
And that was when Bitcoin was kind of, I guess, a little more hyped than it is now. And so they were pretty impressed with that and saw a future there.
Man, that's
Yeah, it's a
crazy.
fun few weeks.
Okay. Man, what? I feel like this, what, 2016, maybe 2017? Maybe. Okay. That is a crazy story. So y'all almost made like, damn, that's actually cooler than Apple CarPlay, really. Like, it's like you got a system where you guys made a system where like you can, I guess, map out things and then pay for things in your bins using Bitcoin. Do you know, like, if anything happened with that? Like, obviously, I don't think they took it anywhere because I don't know of anybody using Bitcoin in their car to pay for stuff. But like, was that the idea, was for Mercedes to kind of have access to like use that technology or what?
Yeah, I don't think they ever actually went forward, and certainly aren't using Bitcoin to pay for things these days. But I think they just like the idea of having a payment system inside their car, and they saw a lot of value in that. That's what they were excited about. Which I don't know. I'm not working with them now, so maybe that's something they're still looking into, possibly.
Okay. Cool, man. Well, good stuff. So hackathons, I'm glad you pointed that out. And I mean, that's a great story as well for people, like in terms of the value or what can kind of come out of that. Job opportunities, cash prizes, all kinds of different things. And then also, I guess, networking as well, meeting other coders or people in tech that you can potentially collaborate with. So those all sound like great opportunities. And so going back to your time or joining MLB, so a recruiter found you on LinkedIn. What do you have, like any kind of advice or recommendations for people in terms of, you weren't necessarily entry level at that point, but regardless of where they're at, whether they're entry level or more senior, more established people in their career, do you have any advice for like how they can improve their resume or LinkedIn profile to maybe get seen by potential recruiters?
Yeah, I would say in terms of actual resume advice, I would say put on your match your resume to whatever job you're looking for. So if you're looking for a job and they say, "Hey, we're looking for someone to work on this technology, on React or on Postgres databases," make sure that is prominent on your resume if that's something that you've worked with, that you have experience on. Other than that, GitHub is huge. I mean, if a resume, if I'm doing an interview with someone and I get their resume, the first thing I'm gonna do is look at their GitHub and say, "Hey, what projects do they have up there?" You know, you're able to literally see exactly what it is, their exact work, which is pretty awesome. It's something you usually can't do in other industries, right? Let me see. Other than that, in terms of maybe interviews, I would say go on a lot of interviews. Interviewing is a skill, just like anything else, any other skill. The more you do it, the better you get at it. Everybody, I don't care how senior you are, is going to be nervous the first interview they've done in a while. And that goes away the more interviews you do, right? So maybe if you're out looking for a job, probably not a good idea to interview with your dream company as the first one, because you're going to be nervous. You're going to, mess up. You're going to trip over your words. But if you have a few interviews with other companies under your belt, you're going to feel a lot more comfortable, right? You'll have answered some of the same questions already, and you'll be a lot more prepared, for that interview with your dream company.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. I definitely think even the interview part, I definitely think we all get rusty as well. And you got to go back and revisit and be like, hey, is the STAR method still, like, is that still what we're doing? Or like, how do we interview? What's the process? How do I make sure I'm like up to date on what's kind of current on the interviewing side? And then also, I think that's great advice on the resume as well, making sure that you match it with the job description. I don't know, does MLB, do you guys use like applicant tracking systems that use like keyword, like systems and all that, or do you how do y'all kind of like screen interviews or resumes, I guess? Is there any kind of like tracking system or keyword searching?
So we have recruiters who work in house who do the first set of screening,
Okay.
and so they're going to look at all the applications that come in, and they're going to be the first people to look at it and say, "Hey, does this match up with the different roles we have?" And MLB is a big enough company to where there's going to be several roles. So even if you applied for a position that doesn't exactly match the role that exactly match your background, there might be another role somewhere else within the company that does match it exactly. And so from there, as a hiring manager, then we'll get the resumes and do a phone screen and then go on from there.
Okay.
One more interview tip I would give, something that I've done, is if I know a company is looking for someone who's an expert in a specific technology, I'll go back and I'll just read through a reference book for that technology. And even if it's something that I work in every single day, a lot of times I'm only working on a small part of that, right? So like if it's a programming language like PHP, for example, I'm not going to be using every single feature of that language every day. There's going to be a ton of stuff that I might not even know about. I might not know exists, or I might not have used in the past number of years. And so reading the reference book, I don't mean reading it front to back. I mean just skimming it and seeing what's in there. Honestly, that's helped me a lot because a lot of times this has happened a few times where I've been in an interview and they'll ask me a question that I didn't know 5 days before, but I just happened to see it while skimming that reference book and was able to give them the answer. And it's usually some obscure feature or whatever in that language, and they're surprised I knew about it. So that's something I've always just kind of, you know, tried to do before an interview, and something that's helped in the past.
Okay, cool. Now, I think that's good advice. I think, like you said, you're not always dealing with all the minutia and the details of every single coding language or whatever. A lot of your duties can be specific to the role that you're in. So I think that's good advice, even if it's just like watching YouTube videos or whatever. But I think the reference book, I like that idea because I feel like it may be more broad and like kind of guided, whereas like YouTube videos, if you don't go down the right algorithm wormhole, you may miss some of the details. So I like that reference book idea. What was that interview process like for you when you first joined MLB? Was it just how many rounds of interviews, and like was it technical interviews, and how did that kind of play out?
So I was interviewing for a position in their San Francisco office, which at the time was really small. They had just started it. I think there was maybe 6 people there. So I did a phone screen with another guy who was a front end developer. He asked me a number of technical questions. I think he went to a rival college, so we talked about college football for probably half the time.
Talking trash.
Yeah.
All right.
And then, I had an on-site interview where I met with a few other engineers, answered a number of technical questions, soft questions. Yeah, it was a pretty standard tech interview.
Okay. That sounds good. How much? It may seem like a small thing, but I'm kind of curious. I've heard people say people hire who they like, and I think there's a lot to that, right? Because I mean, if you're just looking for somebody with a CS degree or somebody, that you feel like from a technical stance only can do what you need to do, I feel like you can find those people any and everywhere, right? But I think it goes to something that if you can find people that you can relate to, communicate well, you think, hey, I could work with them on a good team. So when you kind of made that story about, kind of going back and forth, throwing jabs a little bit at the guy that went to a rival football school, like how much do you think that kind of plays into it? Like, the likability or being able to just relate to people on a personal basis, or like the core skills or soft skills part of it?
Yeah. I mean, I think on one hand, I think it helps a lot, right? I mean, if you talk to someone for an hour and they like you, they're going to be, even if you're not a perfect fit, this is more likely that they will fight for you during, the interview debrief when you meet up with everyone else who interviewed you. And obviously, people want to work with people who they like. Like you spend a lot of time at work. You spend a lot of time, even if you're not in the office, on Zoom with people. It's a large part of our day. And so you want to spend that with people who you enjoy spending that time with. But I will say that, there is a balancing act between hiring people you like and, basically discrimination, I guess. Right.
Yeah.
You don't want to hire all people who are just like you, right? You want to have some diversity of thought. If you have people, everyone like you, you're not going to come up with ideas that you wouldn't have come up with, right? If everyone's the same, you want people who are, you know, obviously fun to work with,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't want people who are an exact copy of yourself. So I think there's a balancing act there, right? You have to enjoy working with people, or you want to hire people who you enjoy working with, but not necessarily someone who is exactly like you.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great way to put it, and I think you're right 100%. I think there's been reports out there that kind of show companies that are more diverse are like more profitable companies as well. And, to that point, you don't want to build an echo chamber where like everybody's saying the same exact thing and has the same exact thought process, because then you're going to kind of let things slip through the crack, so to speak.
For example,
Go
the
ahead.
MLB hires only people who are major baseball fans, right? Huge super
Yeah.
fans of baseball. Obviously, we build products for people who are also casual fans and people who aren't fans at all yet, who might want to become fans. And it's really hard for me as a huge baseball fan to put myself, in the shoes of someone who doesn't know anything about baseball, but as a company who we're trying to reach with our products. So it's important to hire people, who are able to look at things from that perspective. And so, yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. 'Cause I think those people that aren't, diehard passionate fans, they may like be like, hey, this might be a cool feature to have right here. Like, what if we showed that the athletes are running this fast, or that, you know, they were able to slide at this speed, or whatever the case may be. It's just a different thought process that they may be able to, you know, a different perspective that they can contribute that you may not have thought of as a true diehard baseball fan. So I agree with you 100%. That diversity of thought is so important when building the team. And I think you can have both. You can have like the diversity, like both ethnically and, you know, from a thought process, but then also find those people that like you like and that you can, you know, not even necessarily like in the sense of like being best friends, but just like to your point, people that like you enjoy working with. You're like, okay, I can work with him. Like, okay, I can work with John. He's cool. Like, yeah. So I mean, I think like all of those things are like things you have to kind of consider.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, someone you enjoy working with versus someone who you want as your best friend. Those are two
Yeah.
different things, right?
Okay, cool. And so what did you, I know you first got hired into like the video streaming team, MLB TV. What was your role specifically like within that organization or within that team itself?
Yeah, I was hired on first as what was my title? I was a user interface engineer, I think. And
Okay.
so basically, the way that whole system worked is at whatever live event was, there's cameras and a production team, and there's all these different audio and video, what we called productions that would come out of that event, right? And in order to live stream it, we needed to send all those, all that audio and video to be decoded and encoded into different bit rates. Essentially, what the team I was on did was we built the pipeline that did all that stuff. And so there was also an operations team that basically set up each event and said, hey, for this event, we're going to use these decoders and these encoders, and we're going to stream it at these bit rates. And so I built out the UI that allows them to go in and make all those changes. And then we built out a monitoring system that basically, once we got to doing, 100 events a day, it was a lot to manually keep track of. So we built out a system that basically automated the process of checking to make sure that every event is still running the way it's supposed to. So yeah, that was
Okay, cool.
what I worked.
Cool. How long did you stay in that role until you moved on to like the managerial position?
I would say I was there about probably 3 years.
Okay.
And then when I came back to MLB, I joined the baseball data team, which, like I said, works on data specific to baseball, right? So schedules, teams, rosters, players, statistics. And I was on that team for probably about another 3 or 4 years before becoming a manager.
Okay, cool. What do you think? How did you, for somebody that's, maybe they've already kind of got a few years under their belt and they're looking, okay, what's next? Like, or what's the pathway to becoming a engineering manager or just a manager in general? What do you think are kind of some things that help prepare you for that transition from, senior professional into the managerial role?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to figure out whether that's something you actually want to do. Nowadays, something that exists that didn't exist probably 5, 10 years ago is a lot of tech companies, at least the large ones, will have two different tracks, right? So you can go and become a manager and take that track, or you can take what's called the engineering track, where you go from senior to principal engineer. To every company has a different,
Yeah.
level past that. But there's still room to grow if you don't want to be a manager. If you simply want to stick to being an engineer, you can become a principal or an architect. So I would say that's the first question to ask yourself is, which direction you want to go. Specifically for being a manager, I would say a lot of it is skills outside of like the hard engineering skills, right? I mean, I don't think you put up for being a manager if you didn't already have, if you weren't already a good coder, basically. That's kind of a prerequisite. But in addition to that, I think a lot of the soft skills are necessary, right? You have to be able to communicate ideas, deadlines very clearly to people who are technical, also non-technical. I know one of the things that my boss explicitly pointed out about myself was I was good at basically getting a number of senior engineers in a room, trying to decide on how we want to do a project and get them all to come to a consensus on, what technologies to use for a project, or just, the roadmap for whatever it is we're trying to build. So skills like that, I think, become very important if you're looking to take the manager track.
Okay. How did you kind of learn that, especially like being able to get, when you think about a room of like, if I get a room of like engineers, like highly technical engineers, you also have to manage like the egos that come along with that as well, right? And then in the corporate world, you also have different ages. So like you're on the younger side, you may have some people that may be like 20 years more your senior. So it's like, how do you kind of get people to buy in and get them all on the same track and being bought into like what's the right process or the right path to take and working towards one common goal?
Yeah, honestly, I wouldn't even call it egos. I don't think everyone has a large ego, but I think everyone does have opinions, right? Everyone
Yeah.
thinks, hey, this is the way I think we should build it. But I think sticking to what your actual goal is probably the way I think about it, right? I mean, if we could all agree that, hey, this is where we want to be in a year, this is what we want to build, and then working backwards from there to decide, hey, what's the best way to get there, right? So taking everyone's opinions and the different technologies into account, making note of the benefits and the cons of each one. Some things might be deal breakers, and you can throw those off the table. And then once you have a few options, you sit down with everyone and figure out, hey, which one is actually the best. And I think, like you said, kind of taking the ego out of it and making sure that you're making decisions based on what's best for the project is kind of necessary.
Okay, cool. Now, I think that's great. I'm glad you said that, and it's definitely a common theme that kind of comes up with the different guests that I have on here, especially the managers and directors above. They all kind of mention, yeah, the technical side is great, but you got to have, I'm gonna call them core skills. The communication, the empathy, getting people to buy in and like champion whatever change or whatever decision has to happen. I think that's the part that a lot of people kind of minimize or kind of don't really focus on so much when they're either in college or trying to land that first job. They're just purely focused on the technical, the X's and O's, the zeros and ones. But I think that the people component, even in this more AI driven world, the people component is so important. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, I'm not trying to discount the engineering skills. I've worked with people in my career who are amazing engineers and had
Yeah.
zero soft skills, and they are still extremely valuable to the company that they work for because some of them were some of the best engineers that I've ever worked with, but probably would have made the worst managers I've ever had. But I would certainly wouldn't discount the engineering skills.
Yeah. Hey, did you know that you wanted to be a manager? Because I know you said that was the first thing that you would recommend. Like when you first took that leap, or when you were first thinking about becoming an engineering manager, was that something that was like on your radar, or did somebody just kind of say, "Hey, I think you should consider this, Justin"? How'd that kind of come about?
It was a long conversation with my manager that took place over a number of months, probably. We talked about it and decided whether it's something I wanted to do. It is a change. You're going from being essentially just working on your own thing to all of a sudden being responsible for a number of other people and helping them work on their own things. And so you go from being able to sit down for hours at a time coding and figuring out whatever task it is you're working on, to all of a sudden having to context switch constantly and help out other people, and you have twice as many meetings, and it's definitely a change.
All right, so how much of your time is kind of, I guess, spent on helping people figure out like coding issues versus, I guess, meeting with like higher level management to kind of voice the process of like where you guys are at with different changes that are coming down the pipeline? Like, how do you kind of, if you had to, I guess, break down your day in like percentages, how would you kind of partition that?
I would say that's actually something I had issues with when I first became a manager. Is I was still working on a lot of my own tasks because even as a manager, I still have my own work that I'm doing, and I was doing that a little too much, and I wasn't putting enough priority on the actual manager task. But nowadays, I would say it's probably one third, one third, one third, like one third my own stuff, one third helping out, my teammates, and then one third other manager stuff, having meetings. And I think most of that is usually scoping out future projects. So I think one of your jobs as the manager is essentially to provide, as you can say, a vision to your team of like, hey, here's where we are now. Here's what we want to work on the next quarter or the next year, and here's how we plan to get there. Here's how that breaks down into separate tasks. And so part of my job before we start working on those tasks is to figure out, what it is that we actually want to build, talk to the stakeholders, figure out how we want to do it technologically. And so that way, once an engineer is ready to build it, it's at least mostly scoped out, right? They're not sitting there having to ask basic questions about what the end user wants or what programming language we should use for that or whatever.
Okay. Cool. So some of the viewers that watch the show, a lot of times are like early career people or people that are looking to make a career pivot into technology. So I think I'm kind of curious to kind of get some insight from you personally as an engineering manager in terms of like what you're typically looking for in candidates. Like if somebody were to apply to like a junior software engineering position or just any role within your group, like what are some of the things or the thought process that you typically have, or how can they kind of potentially stand out as a candidate that's seeking a role on your team?
Yeah, I would say if I'm interviewing a candidate, the number one thing I'm looking for is trying to figure out how they would fit within the team. So, what would it be like to actually work with this person and give them a task and try to imagine, what it would be like
Yeah.
or how they would go about completing that task. And so, I mean, that's kind of the first decision that I would think about in my head is like, would they be able to go in, complete that task without me, basically holding their hand, right? With obviously people are gonna have questions and need help here and there, but I would say, I would say honestly that and potential are more important than specifically like, hey, does this person have the skills that we're looking for right this second, right? We're hiring people to plan to be on the team for years, not for months, and so it's more important for us that someone's a great engineer a year from now than being a great engineer in the first couple weeks. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, that shows the investment in the long term. Is there one particular coding language that you're looking for? Like, is it React? Is it JavaScript? Is it y'all not using PHP anymore, are y'all?
Nah,
All right, that's what so
we're
what are
a
y'all
Java
using?
on the back end, so we use basically all Java. On the back end, on the front end, obviously it's JavaScript, and then we use the React framework, and that's
Okay.
pretty much what all of our stuff is built in.
Okay. And then to kind of follow up to like what you look for in a candidate, how do you kind of build confidence that like number one, this is somebody that can do the work without me necessarily holding their hand right now today, but then number two, like this is somebody that I believe in a year from now they'll be maybe twice as good or whatever the case may be. How do you kind of gauge that in the interview process? Is there like a certain type of questions that you may ask, or are there certain things that you're looking for just from their portfolio, or like how do you kind of gauge that part of it?
Yeah, so I mean, we'll always ask obviously technical coding questions during an interview, and a lot of times those questions are not things that they're not questions that someone will immediately know the answer to or immediately know how to solve. It's something that you have to work through. It's something that they're going to have to ask, questions about to fully understand it. And so you can kind of see as they work through those coding exercises how they approach a problem and how they solve it, what questions they ask. And so just seeing how they work through a problem really tells you a lot about how they are going to work as engineers. It's not perfect. I wish there was a better way to tell without having to, solve a bunch of coding exercises, but it seems to work
Yeah.
decently well.
How do people typically prepare for those? Is it like Leak Code and Carrot, or are there like any other like tools or resources that you recommend people check out?
Leak code is definitely a good one for algorithm specific ones. I wouldn't say we ask a ton of like hard algorithmic questions, but some companies do. So can't hurt to go to Leak Code and try and solve some of those problems. System design is another one, another topic that you're going to be asked at every interview. There's plenty of people on YouTube who will go through a system and tell you how they designed it, or will focus more on the interview process where they'll say, "Hey, if you're asked this type of system design question, here's how I would do it." And so, I would say both of those are probably the best resources for the technical questions.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Do you have a most favorite and a least favorite interview question that you typically ask, or no?
Honestly, well, my favorite is probably just asking them who their baseball team is, because that means we passed the hard technical portion and we can just chill the rest of the interview. And that also tells me, do they follow baseball? You can learn a lot about someone from just that basic question. That usually leads to a much longer conversation.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I can definitely see depending on how that answer goes, that could just be more casual. I feel like all the best interviews, like that you start off with a script, but then, you end up kind of pushing it to the side a little bit and just having more of a conversation. Those like
Yeah.
every single time, like never fails. I think once you get to that point, like you can kind of tell you're on the right track, both from like the manager side and from the candidate side. So
Mhm.
okay, cool. And then man, so I'm curious, like I'm really trying to paint the picture for somebody that is looking to make that leap. I know you at 21 you had your first kid, boy or girl.
Boy, And I had two
Okay.
more girls later on, but first one was a boy.
Okay, first one was a boy. So if your oldest son, if your son right now was like, "Yo, Dad, I'm thinking about tech. I don't know if I should go to college. I don't know if I should do self-taught. I don't know if I should do boot camp." What kind of advice would you kind of provide for them, for your son specifically, if it was, him trying to decide if he should pursue software engineering and or like how to go about it, how to go about becoming a software engineer?
Yeah, no, I would say if you know that you want to do software engineering as a career, getting a computer science degree from the best college that you can go to is probably the best bet, right? Yeah, there are boot camps and you can learn on your own, but I mean, just based on people I've worked with, the people who come from the computer science will always start off with being better engineers. That doesn't mean they will be for the rest of their careers. People I've worked with people who've gone to boot camps or are self-taught who end up being amazing engineers. But a computer science degree is probably the easiest way to start, right? You spend 4 years essentially just focused on that, as opposed to trying to go to boot camp in the evenings while you work a day job. It's a harder process.
Yeah. No, I can agree with that. And especially like boot camps, they can be like 18 weeks, 40 hours a week. And it's like, and you working a job on top of that, that can be kind of a little unrealistic, I think, or it's very stressful for sure. But I think there might be better alternatives if you can find a solution that doesn't cause you to go in debt, but still gives you like the experience and the knowledge. What do you in your experience, you feel like people with CS degrees are typically better engineers, at least in the beginning? Do you feel like there's anything that the people that go to boot camp self-taught route are missing out on that the CS grads have? Like what kind of makes you feel that way? I guess just in the starting point.
Yeah, so with a computer science degree, you're typically going to learn computer science, which is separate from software engineering, right? You're going to learn a lot of the theory. You're going to learn a lot of the abstractions that a lot of our programming language today are built on top of, right? So
Yeah.
you might learn how to build a compiler. You might learn more about algorithms that someone else has already solved, and that you're typically never going to have to write during a normal job. And so I know for me personally, someone without a CS degree, those are things that I'm still not fully caught up on. And some of it I had to learn on my own. When I needed it for a job, and some of it, I can still see the difference between myself and others who have a CS degree in terms of how they're not the knowledge there, I guess.
Okay, gotcha. Cool. Is there any other advice that you would provide? I mean, I know that that's one of the big questions is like, hey, where do I start in terms of college, boot camp, self-taught? But is there anything else that like maybe I'm not even thinking of, or other people a lot of times kind of miss out on when trying to become software engineers?
Yeah, I would say regardless of whether you're doing a boot camp or a computer science degree, work on your own projects. You're going to learn stuff building your own project from start to scratch that you will never learn, in any kind of school. It's just a lot of things that they're simply not going to have time to go over during a class that's only an hour or 2 hours, and that you'll have to just figure out yourself while building a project. And a lot of times, once you're going for a job, you're interviewing for a job, that stuff does come in handy to know those things.
Nice. I like that. I like that. Hey, so one of the motivating factors for you pursuing this career at 21 was, you had a son on the way, and then you've had more kids now. You're like, hey, I need to make money now, like today. Obviously, software engineering is a high paying job. What have this pursuing this career track, has that kind of provided the lifestyle that you envision you being able to provide for your family, or like what's kind of been the outcome of pursuing this career from like a financial benefit side?
Yeah, I mean, financially, I mean, obviously, I was able to provide for my family eventually.
Yeah.
But I mean, in general, you're not going to become rich by being a software engineer, right? Unless you just happen to work at the right company at the right time. But that said, like you can live a comfortable lifestyle. You can have your bills paid. You can raise a family on a software engineer's salary. That's, I don't know, one of the great things about it. I also enjoy it, and I enjoy the work I do, and so it's kind of those kind of coincide to making it a fun job for me.
Gotcha. So looking back over your career, is there anything that you think you would do differently?
Good question. Yeah, if I can go back and get a CS degree, I would probably do that.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Good point. Good point. All right. Good stuff. Did you take on like any student loan debt back then, or what?
But yeah, it wasn't a ton, but yeah, I did have some. and I was able to pay it off probably a few years after I left college.
Okay. If somebody had the option A is go get the CS degree, let's say take on like 30 grand of student loan debt, or option B, go the boot camp or self-taught route and not have any debt. What would you decide? What would you pick?
That's a good question. I mean, most boot camps aren't free, and they're going to cost maybe not
Yeah.
30 grand.
So I guess
It's going to be
that's a little tough. Let me up that. Let me say 40 grand student loan debt, or you go the self-taught route. Which one would you kind of recommend?
I would say student loan debt. One, it's going to be quicker. If you're self-taught, you got to figure it all out yourself. You got to figure out not just, you know, you don't just have to learn all the skills. You have to figure out what it is that you need to learn. And I mean, at the salaries that you make as a software engineer, I mean, as long as you're somewhat financially responsible, like it shouldn't take you 20 years to pay off $40,000 of student loan debt.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. What was your salary pre MLB days? I don't want MLB coming back looking for me. Pre MLB days, what was the salary, that probably the highest salary you had back then? I know it might have been like a startup or even freelancer.
Yeah. Well, I will say when I was doing startups and still learning, I started, like I told you, I started out 24 grand.
Yeah.
And then I think my next job was 50 in LA. Yeah.
Dang. Okay.
Yeah. And I was broke for a few. But I remember the first full-time job that I got when I moved to the Bay. This would have been 2010. I interviewed. It was a PHP job. And this is one of those jobs where I read that reference book and they asked me questions that just happened to know the answers on directly from what I read. And so I killed that interview. It was a great interview, right? And so the recruiter came back to me and he was like, "Hey, what numbers could they offer you right now to, for you to say yes immediately?" And someone making 50 something grand, I was like 100 grand.
Oh, dang.
Okay, I think I could do that. And I'm pretty sure I lowballed the hell out of myself at that time. But they offered it. They said, "Okay, yeah, send me an offer letter," and we went from there. And obviously, it's gone up from there. But that was sort of this. That was probably my first real software engineering job where I can say, like, I actually passed it, fully passed the interview, and they saw me as an actual software engineer, not as a self-taught guy who's kind of still learning and building his skills.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good point. I definitely get the sense that you lowballed yourself too, especially given like they just say, yeah, I think we could do that like that quickly. But I think there's a big part of it, like getting past that like mental barrier, that mental block where it's like, hey, you're not faking it anymore. Like you're legit software engineer. And I think that can be like a real big confidence boost. The fact that you did land that first role. So it's still good. I'm glad it worked out in the end. Obviously, look at you now. So pretty good. Cool. Hey, so real quick, one before we kind of close it out, this time is flying by. I know you said part of your role as a manager is to like kind of lay out the vision for like where you see the future going for the team. From the outside looking in, I know data is being used a lot more, but like what do you kind of see on the horizon in terms of like data and technology and how it may be used in sports? You can talk about specifically the MLB if you want or can, or if you want to talk about like just sports in general. Where do you kind of see like technology and data impacting sports in the future?
I mean, obviously we have a lot of the traditional stats that people use, batting average, hits, on base percentage, that kind of stuff. But a lot of what's new is all this tracking data that has really started up over the past maybe 5 or so years. And all the things that we can now do with that. So I know you mentioned biomechanics.
Yeah.
On the team side, not so much on the LB side, but on the team side, I mean, every team is definitely hiring biomechanics to be able to look at all of that tracking data and figure out, a competitive advantage or to do player development or for scouting. There's also some pretty cool stuff that we can do in terms of animating all that tracking data. So I don't know if you've seen something like the StatCast 3D stuff, where we can basically take a play that happened on the field and based just on the tracking data, be able to recreate that play through an animation with every player, the ball, and it's pretty awesome. I know other sports have also, started doing some of the same stuff. So in basketball, you can see, for example, how far every player ran during a game, basketball and soccer, and that's something that it's an interesting stat, not just from a fan perspective, but it's also something that the teams themselves use, to improve their players.
Yeah, I would definitely view that from a like a player health and safety standpoint, right? Because I mean, I'm sure at some point, I don't know how much data is already collected, but at some point they'll be able to like maybe see if there's any correlation between like distance ran and likelihood for injury, and then maybe even certain types of injuries that they may be getting. Because I mean, these players are like investments. You got, especially in MLB, they get crazy contracts. Well, I guess soccer or football outside of America, the contracts are even crazier. So I mean, each one of those players are like an asset to the team, and it's like, hey, are we gonna have our $100 million, $200 million player at a greater risk for injury, if whatever, or hey, can we rest this player every Tuesday, like whatever the case may be. So I think it's interesting, like the futures of where data could kind of impact the sports and the different games and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, for anyone who follows baseball this year, there's a ton of conversation about running your team and managing a team based on analytics versus sort of, I guess, old school concepts. And so, yeah, you have all kinds of data now where you can say, hey, we should switch to this pitcher to versus this batter because this one's the batter's a lefty, the pitcher's a righty, and all kinds of other factors. But that might not always be the right move, right? Maybe this pitcher is just not feeling it that day. That's not something you're going to be able to see through analytics, right? And so there's a lot of conversation going on about where you draw the line between basing decisions on analytics versus everything we've always based sports decisions on in the past. So it's pretty interesting to see that play out.
Yeah, the AI and technology, you still can't capture that human emotion part. So yeah, there definitely gonna be some stuff they missed out on there. I got an uneducated question from a sports perspective. Like I know you can have different pitchers come into the game. Like to your example that you outlined, where you have like, hey, this is a lefty hitter, this is a righty hitter. Can you have like the same pitcher come in and out of the game? Like, 'cause I'm just thinking like in terms of the rotation. Let's say like batters 3 and 4 are lefties, and you want to like switch out the pitcher just for those batters over and over throughout the game. Is that something that you can even do?
Not at the MLB level. So
Okay.
one, a pitcher can only pitch once per game. Once someone pitches
Okay.
in the league, they're out of the game. And then even have a rule now where a pitcher has to face 3 batters before you can take them out because teams are basically getting extremely analytical and pitching one pitcher for one batter, and then they realize that the matchup between the next batter is going to be better with another pitcher in their bullpen, and they would switch them out, and that slows the game down. The opinion was it's not necessarily great for the fan experience to have all those pitching changes. So yeah, that's no longer possible to do in today's game, at least not in MLB.
Okay. I got you. Did you play sports in like high school or college at all?
Yeah, high school I played baseball, track, football, and then I ran track for a couple years in college.
You ran track for USC?
Yeah, 2 years.
Oh, what
Was
man? I didn't know
not
that. That's cool. What'd you run, by the way?
200 and 400.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I like those. Those were like some of my favorite events in high school. Obviously, I wasn't good enough to do collegiate level, especially not USC. That's a whole nother level. Were you like on scholarship or walk on or what?
No, I was technically a walk on.
You was walk on. Okay. What was your best 400 time?
I ran a 48.
48. Okay. No, I'm not even gonna mention mine then. Okay, that's cool, man. Good stuff. Good stuff. No, it's cool seeing like everything come full circle. Like starting off in the athletics, in high school and college, and then now you're on the technical side, engineering side, but still in sports. I think that's something that I think a lot of people don't necessarily know, but I think it's a very interesting opportunity. You can still combine your passion with your skill set and merge the two, and then you could be living the dream job. So I'm glad things worked out for you and you were able to kind of do both.
Yeah, no, I think that's even, as a software engineer, I think I'm really, really lucky to one, have a job where, it pays off financially, but also I get to work on stuff that I really, really enjoy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that in tech, there's a lot of jobs that pay a decent amount, but don't necessarily, they might not, you might not be working on stuff that's interesting, right? You might be building forums for advertisers all day, every day.
Boo. That sounds boring.
Yeah. And, I guess you just kind of have to think about it and make a decision on what's important to you. Do you want to make a ton of money or do you want to, enjoy your work. And if you're lucky, sometimes you can find something that, is right in the middle and you get both out of it.
Yeah, I think the most boring job I heard of at my first company, General Motors, they had a role called fastener engineer. And so literally these are engineers that their whole job is to like design and work on and manage fasteners. And so if you don't know, fasteners can be like screws and bolts and all that kind of stuff. So like imagine just being an engineer responsible for a whole bunch of different screws. And I'm like, that would be, for me, that would be like the most boring thing ever. And so there's, a lot of time in the technology world, to your point, a lot of time like tech is sexy. And it's like, hey, this is like what's in and what's trending right now in terms of career opportunities. They hear like big pay, but you do have to watch out, like make sure you're not just doing it purely for the money and that it aligns with what you're interested in. So I think that's some good advice.
But that said, I mean, in tech, there's still a lot of possible movement. Like if you get bored at a job, it's usually not, extremely difficult to find something else that you're more interested in.
Yeah.
Which is great. You're not stuck at one place, right? Your skills are usually very transferable from company to company.
Yeah.
Or from one, internal within the same company.
What I know, software engineering is typically like one of the most in-demand jobs in tech. Are there any other roles that you would recommend people check out if they're kind of curious about the different career opportunities?
But yeah, definitely. I mean, just within tech, it's not just software engineers who work on products. You also have project managers, product managers, which aren't necessarily technical roles, but they're still very important in terms of developing a product and figuring out what exactly it is that you should build, managing timelines between different teams who might all be working on the same product. So yeah, there's definitely roles outside of just the technical software engineering one that most tech companies are always hiring for.
Okay, cool.
I was gonna say there's also the traditional roles of HR and that kind of thing that every company has, including tech companies. So
okay, cool. Last question. It's a two-part question. Since I'm fortunate enough to have you on here, an engineering manager at MLB, I got a number one to ask you: is MLB hiring in the tech STEM space? And then the second part of that question would be, what could a candidate do to potentially increase their likelihood of maybe just getting in contact with a recruiter or hearing back from a recruiter if they apply for a role at MLB?
Yeah, MLB is definitely hiring. Our main headquarters are in New York, and if you go to the careers page at MLB.com, you can look through there, find all the different roles that we're hiring for, find one that fits, and apply to it. If you want to take the extra step, I guess you can find someone at MLB to reach out to and say, "Hey, I applied here. Check out my resume, see what you think."
Okay, cool. It sounds like a plan. I'll definitely, MLB is going to be super easy to find. Google people, but I'll put the links down in to the career website down below. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I definitely got to give you the floor, kind of like just any kind of last minute, anything that I may have missed or any shout outs or anything like that. Just want to kind of give you the floor before we close it out to kind of spotlight anything, or if there's any new developments within the MLB that you just want to mention before we close it out. The floor is yours.
Let me see. I think we covered pretty much everything. Yeah, I definitely enjoyed the interview. I enjoyed listening to the podcast. I listened to a number of episodes, including the one with the project manager from the NBA. So yeah, just keep doing what you're doing. This is definitely valuable, from people just starting out to people who are, establishing their careers. Like it's fun to listen to these interviews and just to see like what other people are doing at other companies, because we're not always aware. I've been here for 9 years. A lot has changed in the tech industry in those 9 years, and so I'm not always up to date on how it's changed if those changes haven't happened at the exact company that I'm at. So yeah, I'm definitely enjoying all the interviews that you're putting out right now.
Hey man, I appreciate it. I mean, it's great to hear that. Warms my heart. I appreciate you watching and supporting and everything like that. And I appreciate your willingness to come on here. I try to give people, I try to give the viewers a unique opportunity to kind of hear from you, a manager, a black man that's an engineer, and just kind of increase the representation that's out there. Because I think, number one, visually, that's important for people to see. But then number two, I think it's important to kind of hear the insight from you, a hiring manager, and kind of better learn and understand, like, what do you typically look for from your standpoint. So I appreciate all the gems you dropped and all the insight you provided. Much appreciated.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep. So that is it, guys. I appreciate it. I don't know if I said subscribe. Look, I always forget to tell y'all to subscribe until the very end. I'll probably continue to forget. But if you stuck around this long, please make sure you like, share, subscribe the video. Definitely just want to increase the impact and the reach that this YouTube channel is having, or that this podcast is having, if you're listening to the audio version. So make sure you subscribe, download all that good stuff, and make sure you stay tuned. We'll be back soon next week with another great episode. This has been a great opportunity hearing from Mr. Justin Lucas. I appreciate you, and I'll see you all later. Take care. Peace.